Hello and welcome everyone to lesson 23 in this Chess Beginner to Winner series, in which we take you from absolute chess beginner to winning your first chess tournament games and beyond. And today I will discuss the topic of controlling lines. So, what does that mean, and how can you use it to win chess games? Well, you may already be familiar with controlling specific squares, where you just line up a bunch of your pieces on that square and you try and take control of it. Well, this is similar, but now we're going to be talking about trying to take control of ranks, files, or diagonals. So I have two demonstration games, which should be quite interesting. They're both played by Rudolf Spielmann, who was one of the top 10 chess players about 100 years ago in the early 1900s. This first game was played in 1914. Rudolf Spielmann had the white pieces, and he played against, looks like Alexander Flamberg with black, and this was played in Germany. So if we do a game review here, it looks like Spielmann played with 96.4% accuracy versus his opponent's 63.8%. And also, Spielmann had 5 great moves and 2 brilliant moves, and only 1 inaccuracy, whereas his opponent had 3 inaccuracies and 3 mistakes. Let's take a look at this game, and it's a pretty short one. And then the second game I have will be a little bit longer than this one, but this one is only about 15 moves. But it's pretty interesting to watch how Spielmann plays here. So, the game began with e4, e5, standard opening moves. And now, knight to c3. And for you beginners that aren't quite as familiar with this, usually you might see knight to f3 more often. Well, this knight to c3 move is called the Vienna game. And so you just develop a knight and protect this e-pawn. And so Spielmann's opponent just plays knight to f6, putting more pressure on that pawn. And now we have this Vienna gambit here with f4. So this is kind of like a king's gambit, I guess, where you push this f-pawn. And a gambit usually gives up a pawn or some material in exchange for something else, like a quicker attack, quicker development or an attack. Here we have this f4 move, and the opponent responds with d5, refusing the gambit. And so now the game continues with f captures e5. So the less valuable pawn captures towards the center, capturing this more valuable central pawn, and it opens up a file here. So we have this half open file, which could be used later by a rook. So when you want to control lines, you want to find places that are open for either your bishops, your queen. So right now we already see that this bishop is controlling this diagonal pretty good. The queen is controlling this diagonal, or at least attacking along these diagonals. And if the rook can maybe move in here after castling, the rook might try and control this half-open file and aim up here at this f-pawn, which can be weak because the king is the only piece protecting that at the moment. Continuing on, we have knight captures here because that knight was under attack. So black captures a pawn. And now knight to f3 is played. So Spielmann just continues developing. And now bishop to g4. So this line is open for the bishop, and he's able to move down through here and pin the knight to the queen. So another advantage of trying to control lines and diagonals, it gives your pieces more mobility down those diagonals and lines. As we see here, this bishop was free to just move down this diagonal and pin the knight. So now we have the queen developing to a better diagonal itself. It was kind of blocked in here, but now it can, possibly move up this direction. But more importantly, the queen is lined up on the king here. So if this e-file ever opens up, this queen could be a danger to the king on e8. All right, so now we have knight to c5, and this is a mistake by Spielman's opponent, Alexander Flamberg. So what should he have played here? Well, it looks like it would have been better to capture the knight here, but that would have allowed the b pawn to capture towards the center, opening a file possibly for this rook here, and the play may have continued with c5 trying to control the center, and then the rook taking control of this half open file here, and then the queen developing to create a battery of bishop and queen on this diagonal. So a very good way to control lines, whether it's ranks, files or diagonals, is to create batteries where here on a diagonal you can have two pieces pile up. A queen and one of the bishops can create a battery with either the bishop in front, or sometimes the queen will be in front of the bishop, especially if the queen wants to deliver a checkmate. And then for ranks and files, you can have up to three pieces, both rooks and even the queen. So you could triple pieces on a rank or file if you got the rooks and the queen all lined up on that rank or file. And that can be very dangerous. So continuing on, if we go back to the game, after this queen to e2 move, and then the knight does not capture, instead retreating back, and now this was a mistake because now we have d4 attacking this knight here, and this is the computer gives this a great move here with this d4 attacking here. And how does the opponent respond? Well, another mistake here, capturing the knight and giving up the bishop pair here. So what should the opponent have played? It looks like best would have been just to retreat the knight that was under attack. And then the game may have continued with queen to b5, which is what the computer says is best. And then maybe knight to d7. And you think, well, here this just gives up a b pawn. But if that pawn is captured, there's a possibility of this b file opening up for the rook. The queen could capture on b7, and then the rook could move to b8, attacking that queen and trying to take control of this half open b file and get some counterplay for this rook. So let's see here. The computer recommends just bishop to e3, not going after that b pawn, just developing another bishop, trying to protect this d pawn in case of a capture of the knight, which is defending that d pawn. And then after c6, attacking the queen. Finally, this pawn is captured. But like I said, the rook could move over here, trying to attack the queen and then counterattack down the b file. But the queen would have a choice of either picking off this a pawn or even this c pawn here. So anyway, this is how the game may have gone. according to the computer. But back to the game at hand here. So d4, attacking the knight. The bishop captures, which is a mistake. The queen recaptures. And now it looks like queen to h4 is played with check. So queen to h4 check. And this is an inaccuracy. So once again, it would have been better to just retreat this knight back to e6 here. So the king is under attack. So we have g3, and the computer says that's a great move to block. Although there's not many options, I guess. If we go back and look at that, one way to save this pawn may be queen to f2, but then after a capture and the king captures, well, the good attacking queen would have been traded off here. So Spielman, I assume, he wants to avoid that and save that queen for an attack later. So here we have g3, chasing the queen away. The queen captures this pawn, which was attacking the knight, and that's the best move in the position. But if we look already, white is ahead here. And now we have bishop to e3, attacking the queen. So the queen captures another pawn here, which is best. And now we have, instead of just going after this knight here, Spielman castles on the queen side here and gives this rook, which was doing nothing in the corner, this half open file here. So the rook will exert a lot of pressure up the d file here. And so now the game continues with c6, protecting this pawn, which we had the queen, the knight, the rook, everything was piling up on this d pawn. So now what does Spielman do in this position? Well, he plays a brilliant move, sacrificing his knight for 2 pawns. So capture is best. And then the rook recaptures, which the computer says is an inaccuracy here, that it would have been a little better to just attack with the bishop here. But this gives the momentum to Spielman attacking here, driving this queen away. And so the queen makes a mistake, moving to e6 here. And now, well, we can take a look and see what would have been better. Queen to c7 would have been a better move, helping to guard this knight. And then bishop to b5, knight blocking that check, and the bishop captures here. And then after capture, we have rook captures. And so at this point, if we look at the material, let's see here. Spielman has 2 rooks, and looks like material would be even at this point. And black would probably want to quickly castle here. Probably castle kingside. Otherwise, there could be, well, either way, there could be pressure exerted up these open files here. And this knight is pinned to the king. So, if we have a capture, pawn captures, this pawn could fall because we have 3 pieces all piling up on that knight. So, I don't know. The advantage looks like it is in Spielman's favor if the game would have gone in this direction. But if we go back let's go back a little bit further here. All right. So after Spielman castles queenside, we have c6 helping to defend this pawn. The knight sacrifices itself for these pawns. And then we have this rook capture chasing the queen. And already the opponent is in trouble and makes a mistake here. And now this allows bishop to c4, a great move, lining up on the queen, threatening to move this rook with check and then just pick off the queen. So now we have queen to e4, attacking Spielman's queen here, and getting out of the line of this bishop that was lined up on the queen. But this is an inaccuracy, and after this move, Spielman is just winning. So it looks like better would have been just retreating the knight back here, and blocking the possible check by this rook. But then we would have this rook lining up on the queen and the king. So we see how Spielman is using his bishops, rook, and queen to just control many more lines than his opponent. Both of his opponent's rooks are just trapped in the corner, not doing much at all. His one bishop is on the back rank. It may control a few line, or one line here, but is he really controlling anything? Because wherever the bishop would go, it would probably be a defensive move. Anyway, it's not looking good for Spielman's opponent. So we have bishop to c4, lining up on the queen. The queen moves here, attacking Spielman's queen, but this is an inaccuracy because now we have this brilliant move, ignoring the queen that's under attack and just capturing on c5. And so after this move, Alexander Flamberg just resigns here. And so you may think, well, he resigned. Well, can't he just capture the queen? But if we look at that possibility, after a queen capture, that would be an inaccuracy that would lead to a mate in 4. So, how would that occur? Well, after rook to e1, check, there are not many options here. So it looks like the computer wants black to just block with the queen, and then the queen would be immediately captured. So that would just delay the inevitable. If the only other move that's possible is to block with the bishop like this, well, then we just have rook captures with check, protected by the bishop, and then the only place for the king to go would be here, and then the other rook would deliver a mate. And we see how the bishops and the rooks are just controlling everything, controlling these diagonals, controlling the D and E file, controlling the 7th rank and even the 8th rank up here, and it leads to this possible mate. So that is why in this position that black cannot just capture the queen. Let's see what other possibilities are. The computer says that it looks like queen to e6 is recommended, but then you could just pick that queen off, give up the rook with a rook check here on d8, and then just pick the queen off with the bishop there. But this is the line that the computer says, how the game may have continued. Instead of that, f5, protecting the queen, and then the game may have continued with the other rook developing to d1 here and creating a battery of the 2 rooks up this open d file. And then after this, the game may have continued with bishop to e7, and now maybe black is getting ready to castle, but we could have queen to c3 here, And now we see the bishops and the queen just controlling all these diagonals aimed up at the king side. So, this is just one possibility, and it looks very dangerous. It looks like just capturing this pawn with the rook is another option. And let's see here how the computer recommends that things would possibly continue. Just developing the knight, helping to protect this bishop on e7, but also trying to control some of the center here. And now queen captures, rook to f8, which was under attack. And then the game could continue with bishop captures, queen captures, something like this. But we see this king just caught in the center here, and it's not looking good. Spielman is also ahead by one pawn at this point. And then let's see if we go back. One other possibility in this position, instead of bishop capturing on e7 there, another option might be this move, rook to d7, and then rook to c8, and then queen just captures with the threat of checking here on g6 possibly. And then what's the option? The only option is to just block here with the rook, but then the queen could capture. So I don't know. It's just it's never good when you let your king get trapped in the center. So I'll go back through this game quickly. E4, E5, the Vienna game. Pressure is being put on this e-pawn by the knight here. And then this gambit attacking with the f-pawn, which is unprotected. But instead of capturing and accepting the gambit, we have a counterattack here in the center. So capture, attacking the knight. The knight captures the pawn. And now Spielman just develops another knight. The bishop pins. And then the queen develops. The knight retreats. And then we attack the knight with the pawn. Then after a capture, queen captures. A check by the queen. Block. Pawn is captured. But this allows the bishop to develop, putting more influence here on the center and trying to take control of these diagonals. The queen retreats, attacking a pawn, but now we have castling, which brings this rook out to help control this half-open file and put pressure on this d pawn. So the pawn is protected, but now we have a knight sacrifice for 2 pawns, which allows the rook to recapture, chasing the queen, and this is where the mistakes really come into play with the king stuck in the center here. The queen retreats, but the other bishop that was not doing anything or not doing much here on the back rank develops, and it develops to a nice line here, lining up on the queen on this f-pawn. The queen launches forward here, counterattacking Spielman's queen, but he just ignores that and captures the knight and develops his bishop there. So this is where the opponent resigned, because this other rook is going to come out and join in the attack. We saw that the queen cannot attack Spielman's queen because there's just too much pressure up the center of the board with the king stuck in the open here. All right. Well, I hope that game helped to stress the power of trying to stress the importance of trying to control ranks, files, diagonals, different lines to try and break through with an advantage. So we'll take a look at the second game by Spielman here against, let's see, so this next game was played in 1927. Rudolf Spielman once again had the white pieces, and now he's playing Rudolf Leherme. I believe I pronounced that. Maybe he's French. All right, so this was played in Germany in 1927. So let's look at the quick game review. It looks like once again Spielman played 95.7% accuracy. This opponent played a little better with 77.9%. And Spielman had 2 brilliant moves and 1 great move. And now no mistakes, misses, or inaccuracies, but his opponent had 5 inaccuracies and 2 mistakes. So if we look at this graph here, it looks like White just slowly, kept the lead, slowly built up his lead until it just, ended in an overwhelming advantage and a win. So let's see how Spielman did this by controlling lines. Okay, so e4, once again, an attacking, more tactical opening for White when you push this e-pawn. And his opponent decides to play a little more defensive here with e6, the French defense. So the one downside, I guess you could say, to playing e6 is that it lets White bring both of his central pawns forward and build this powerful pawn center here. So normally you don't want to let your opponent do that. And if they do, you want to try and counterattack. So, or chip away at that central pawn formation. So d5 is played, attacking this e4 pawn. Spielman just develops a knight to defend it. And now we have a capture. So after a recapture, if we look at the position, White has more of a space advantage with this pawn on d4 compared to this central pawn on e6. And his knight is in a decent central location here. So the game continues with knight to d7. Now, this kind of blocks the bishop in. Why did the knight move here? Well, his plan is to bring this other knight up and attack White's knight. And then if there's a capture, this knight can recapture and end up on a better f6 square here. So development of the other knight by Spielman, likewise by his opponent. And so now we have capture and knight recaptures. So now the knights are even, but White has a little more space in the center with his d-pawn versus this e6 pawn. And so now continuing development, the bishop moves to this strong d3 square and tries to exert pressure on both diagonals up here towards the king side and on the queen side as well. And White is also ready to castle. So now we have h6, which is played. Why is that played? Well, I guess it's a defensive move to keep this bishop from being able to pin the knight, to prevent the knight from jumping up here to g5, and maybe, if black castled, perhaps this was to prevent the bishop sacrifice on h7 with a knight jumping up here and generating an attack. So h6 is played, and the computer says that's an inaccuracy, that it would have been better just to develop the dark squared bishop to d6 and control both diagonals in a similar fashion to what White did by moving to d3 here. And the game may have continued instead with bishop to d6, and the computer gives a long line here of how the game may have gone with both bishops developed here on d3 and d6, and I'll just run through that real quick. So developing the queen, lining up on the king, and now this bishop is blocked in. It's a bad bishop blocked by its central pawn here on e6. So it would try to find another way to gain control of important lines by developing here to b7. So now we have this interesting move. By pushing this b pawn, it creates light squared weaknesses. Now this pawn cannot block that bishop, and then we would just have a check here, block by the bishop. Then that could be ignored with castling, a4, just gaining space on the queen side, c6, now blocking the bishop, retreating, and lining up on the king side here. And so then, this possibility could, well, the possibilities could continue with this c pawn push. And then I'll just play through these moves real quick, and you see what the computer gives as lines here that are possible. And then I'll just play it to the final move they show. So if we look at this, this is interesting because we have a battery here lined up towards white's king side. The other bishop is lined up. So we see black trying to control this half open file, these two diagonals down towards the king. White is lined up on the king side here. This bishop is playing more of a defensive role, and this is another way for the rook to gain some type of influence in the game, is to jump up here to a4, where the rook may swing over along this fourth rank and in the future maybe exert pressure on the king side possibly. So the rook can also maybe cover the center a little bit from the side here on a4. So that is one way the game could have gone. But if we get back to what actually happened, bishop to d3, h6 was played, kind of a passive defensive move. And now queen to e2, lining up on the king. And now the bishop is developed to d6. But the computer says that now that is an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to play a6 to limit the scope of this queen bishop battery towards the queen side here. So let's see. If we take a look at that, instead of developing the bishop, this is what the computer wanted. A6, limiting the d3 bishop, and then just developing here. Although this could allow the knight to jump in here and harass this bishop, but then I guess the bishop could maybe move up to f4 if that happens. So computer gives bishop to d6, knight to e5, blocking the line of this bishop aimed towards the king side there. The knight repositioning in the center and attacking. The bishop retreating to maintain control over these lines, these diagonals. So both of these bishops are doing a great job controlling lines on both sides of the board. And now we have a pawn push, castling to activate this queen side rook on this file here, which if you're going to develop the rooks, you want to put them on open or half open files, or some place where you have pawns pushed forward or plan to push pawns forward. And the computer actually recommended c3 instead, which may help limit the scope of the pieces, keep them out of b4, prevent this pawn from pushing forward. But anyway, queen to e7, queen's reposition here, And this is what the computer gives, so this type of possibility. But once again, back to the game. We have queen to e2, lining up on the king here. Bishop to d6, just developing this bishop, trying to control lines on the king side and queen side at the same time. And then likewise with white, he just develops off the back rank and he's controlling both of these diagonals. And now we have castling. And the computer says that this is a mistake. That once again, it would be better to push this pawn to a6 here. And I mean, I guess we could take a quick look at that. a6, knight to e5, just jumping forward into the enemy camp here. Queen developing, and then castling, which looks familiar from the previous recommendation by the computer. So back to bishop to d2, castling by black, which the computer says is a mistake. And now it looks like because of that, an immediate rook to g1 with the idea of just sending this rook rook to g1 with the immediate idea of sending this g pawn forward for an attack against the king, especially since this pawn has been pushed forward. So in the game, castling was played, which is still excellent, although the computer wanted that rook to g1 move. Then developing the other bishop. So we see there's kind of a mirror action going on here in the center with the bishops. They're both trying to control a lot of diagonals, but white has done a little better job because his pawn is pushed forward, and here this pawn is blocking the light squared bishop. So we have e5, jumping forward. Once again, the computer wants this g pawn to be pushed forward here, opening lines and just starting an immediate attack on the king side here. But knight e5 is played to harass this light squared bishop, to get closer here to the king side for an upcoming attack. And now we have c5, a counterattack on the queen side, which this can be a good idea where you push the pawn in front of your opponent's king and hopefully trade it off, and then you can get your rook here to c8 and line up on your opponent's king and try and get some type of attack going. So now we have capture. Instead of capturing that pawn, the knight is knocked out here. And so after recapture, Spielman is ahead by a pawn, and he has gotten rid of his opponent's bishop pair. And his bishops have great lines here, just aimed up at the king side. And also this rook is on a nice open file lined up on the queen. So it's starting to look dangerous already. And there's a plus 1.88 advantage to Spielman at this point. So the game continues with bishop to c6, trying to improve the scope of this bishop, which was blocked by this e6 pawn. So now the bishop has a nice line down towards the queen side, possibly lining up on the rook. And now we have this attack on the pawn being ignored, although the computer preferred moving that rook over to e1 here. But we have this move, which we'll see why this bishop was moved here shortly. It looks like it's limited the scope. It's blocked by its own queen, but it has created a battery of queen and bishop here. And creating a battery with your rooks or the queen and the bishops can often give you an advantage. So we have queen to e7 here. maybe putting pressure on this pawn, getting off of this open line, because this is another issue here. After this bishop moves, there's another threat of moving this bishop up here to h7 with check on the king and a discovered attack on the queen, and the queen would be lost here. So the queen moves off of that line, and then we have queen to d4. Well, this looks interesting, and this is the best move. It centralizes the queen, but you might think, well, now the rook can attack the queen, which is what happens. This king side, or sorry, the rook on the king side moves over and attacks the queen. But now there's this option to block with the bishop and attack at the same time here. So now we have queen to e8, and rook to g1 here to protect this pawn, but also allow this pawn to just push forward, and the rook is lined up on the king. So after b6, attacking this c pawn, we have the queen ignoring that and moving over to the king side to aid in the upcoming attack. And the computer actually preferred an immediate g4 pawn push. And now, in this position back here, white could have captured here. And then if there's a recapture, the queen could have captured and come out ahead. But, well, there's another issue. I guess the queen wouldn't recapture because this bishop is being protected by the pawn. And another downside to if there would be an exchange here is that it would open up lines on the queen side here that could help black generate an attack on white's king. So the queen just ignores all that and moves over to the king side to help with this upcoming attack after this g-pawn finally starts moving forward. So we have capture, and now this bishop is unprotected. So instead of recapturing the pawn, the bishop ignores that pawn and goes after the knight here, which is one of the defenders of the king side, with the threat of capturing, and then after a recapture, breaking open this king side. So it's already a dangerous attack that's starting to build up here. And now the queen helps to protect the knight, but it looks like that's an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to just retreat the knight and counterattack on the bishop here. And then, let's see, looks like bishop to c3 would be best. Just retreating back, but keeping an eye on the king side. And so this is looking really dangerous, both bishops, the queen, and when this pawn starts pushing forward, the rook's going to help on the attack here. And so in the game, we had bishop retreating to e5 but attacking the knight. The queen is helping to protect the knight. And now we have g4 finally pushing forward here and starting the attack. And now c4 is played, counterattacking the bishop here. And so this is probably to encourage this bishop to move and then maybe trade off some of the rooks to lessen the amount of pieces that could assist in the attack against black's king that's coming up here. But instead of c4, it looks like better would have been bishop to f3, immediately attacking the rook. And now it looks like the computer recommends that you just ignore this attack on the rook and just start pressing forward with this g-pawn and trying to attack. So I I don't know, maybe the computer is a little bit confused because here it's showing rook to d2, but let's see, g5, it's saying g5 is a miss. So earlier the computer recommended this immediate pawn push. We'll see what it says. Knight to h5, then check. The king would have to move. Let's see. Now, why wouldn't the king take that? Let's see. I looked at this earlier. I'm just trying to remember. There was a reason why the king couldn't take that. Oh, because of g6 here. So, well, let's take a look at it. King captures. Then you have g6 with check. Oh, okay. And the queen is under attack here. So you check, and then you just pick off the queen there. He would lose a queen, so that was why. But anyway, let's see what happened in the game before I stray off on another line. So g4, c4, attacking the bishop. So now we have g5, just ignoring this attack on the bishop, pressing forward with g5, which is the best move. And now we have knight to d7, retreating here, and that is an inaccuracy. Knight to e8 would have been better. So if we look at knight to e8, then an attack here on the queen. The queen retreats because this pawn does not want to capture here and start opening lines up with this rook lined up here, and the bishop and the queen. So it's really looking dangerous for black. So it could have continued with this, capture. So this is one way that the game could have gone. And let's see here. Back to this g5 pawn push. The knight moves to d7. And now we have queen captures here, a brilliant move, sacrificing the queen. And the best move to avoid a mate is to capture that queen. But then after recapture with check here, now it looks like queen to g5 is the only way to avoid immediate avoid a checkmate. Otherwise you're going to have a mate in 3 or even a mate in 2, but queen to g5. And so, of course, that move is not played because most people will not want to give up their queen. Then you would just be behind in material and you would end up losing anyway. So, I mean, we could take a look at that. Queen to g5, capture with check. The king moves. Then we check over here. The king moves some more. We march the pawn up. The knight attacks that pawn and helps block the king here. But we capture, queen, and king retreats. And then we have queen to h4 just lining up here with this discovered attack, which will be pretty dangerous. So, with this extra material, white would just be winning if the game took that direction. But after the queen sacrifice here, the game continues with capture. Now there's a check by the rook. And then we have the king making a mistake here. Running over to f8, and Spielman plays rook to g8, another brilliant move which finishes the game off, because here black is forced to just capture. So at this point, black resigned, but he would be forced to capture, and that would allow the pawn to move forward with check. And so the king would have to move again, and then we would have the pawn promoting to queen with checkmate. And if we look at these bishops, they're doing an incredible job of controlling lines here, controlling these diagonals up to the king side, which made it possible to push this pawn forward. And the rooks did a great job. The one here on the d file helping to control that, but more importantly, this rook that was on the g file, especially after that pawn pushed up the board and opened up the g file, and the rook was able to check there. So quite an interesting game. I guess I could go back through it real quickly here, and you can see how this game played out. So you see the bishops trying to control the diagonals from the center of the board. And then the pawns start trading, opening up files. The queen is kind of trying to fight for this file, but the rook is lining up on the queen. So there's a threat of this bishop moving up here with check, and then a discovered attack on the queen. So the queen has to get off of that line. And that allows this queen to help control this open file after an attack. So black is fighting for control of the open d file, but the bishop blocks the line of this rook and attacks the queen at the same time. So after the queen retreats, we have the rook, instead of taking control of this half open file, the rook just lines up on the king here and gets ready to push this g-pawn. So here we have black attempting to open lines on the queen side here and get some kind of counterplay against white's king. But the queen ignores that and just lines up here on the king side. And now we have the bishop repositioning. And so both bishops are lined up on the king here. The queen tries to help defend that knight. But here comes the g-pawn, making room for this rook on g1. And a counterattack on the bishop, but that's ignored with this attack on the knight and on this pawn, trying to open up lines on the king. So the knight retreats, attacking this bishop, but now we have the queen sacrifice here. And this queen, something must be done about it because there's a threat of mate in 1 here. What is another option? It looks like, well, best is just to capture here. The king. Is there a way to defend? Let's see. What about queen to f8? Does that even do anything? Queen to f8? No, because then there's the other mate threat of queen to h7 because of this bishop. So the bishop, rook, queen, white is doing a phenomenal job of just controlling all these lines. And so after capture, recapture, the g file is opened and controlled by that rook. The king retreats, but now we have a rook sacrifice. And then a capture. Pawn is able to push here because of that, and then promote. And so checkmate. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed these 2 examples which featured Rudolf Spielmann, one of the top 10 players in the world about 100 years ago in the early 1900s. If you enjoyed his games, check out more of them online. And you can learn a lot from his attacking games and his attacking style. And especially here, in both of those games, how he really controlled lines with his bishop and queen and rooks, and outplayed his opponents. All right. Well, if you enjoyed these videos, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions, or even any requests if there is something specific that you would like to see in future chess videos. So thank you everyone for watching, and have a super chess day.